Hey everyone, we are ready to go here, I believe. Thumbs up from the corner. Again, good morning, everyone. Welcome. First order, we'll have Shelley take the roll.
Busick.
Here.
Bullis.
Here.
Palm Connor.
Here.
Cosgriff.
Here.
Dabbert. Dardis.
Here.
Gary. Grinberg.
Here.
Fremstead.
Here.
Grosky.
Here.
Hanson.
Here.
Volk.
Here.
Worth.
Thank you. Discussion, motion I'll accept on the minutes. Noted any changes?
I think Jeff was listed twice as here and not here, present and absent.
It'd be really hard to accomplish.
Exactly.
He's really good at that.
Is he?
I see that. I
Other,
wasn't here. I was on the, no, I watched it on video.
did we look good? I'll start-
Absolutely.
Motion to approve with that noted change.
I'll make the motion for approval.
Second. Discussion, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign, motion carries. Well, as our plan is continuing to move forward, you know, our next few meetings are largely up to you to decide the direction as a task force to go. I felt that, at least from an agenda standpoint, I think I could gauge the sentiment that the discussion and the next steps would at least, you know, go down two different paths, the new construction and then the redevelopment. And so that's why I just listed that under the task force discussion. I sense that that was the direction as you move forward will kind of align, if you will. And then whether there's going to be recommendations on legislative changes, you know, that should also be a footnote that as we move forward with our report and our delivery to the citizens, what your recommendations are. So I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to you.
Well, Commissioner, I'm an old teacher, so I had to summarize what we covered. I don't want to make this here. This is what I understand, but as I go back through this, and I did this in 2003, it seems like there's two major components, and we lump them all and call them special assessments. But we have construction costs, we have a financing mechanism. And so as we attack this, I just put together a quick summary of construction costs and what I think are financing costs. I'll share that. I don't know that we'll all agree on it. We can start there. Maybe I didn't make that copy. Perfect
I
number.
think we're the second.
Well, all right. Excuse me here. If you look at this, if we start just using 2018, kind of trying to get a feel for it, we could certainly, do a time series analysis for everything. But if we look at 2018, special assessment costs were $33.9 million. 79% of the specials were in costs. I think we had that in one of our presentations. You take engineering and administration is $5.9 million, is 13.8%. The other costs, testing, inspections, land acquisition, which you kind of go, why are we acquiring land? But there's right-of-way that has to be acquired sometimes to accommodate the infrastructure. And then construction interest. What happens on these projects is the interim financing. You have to pay the contractors for progress as they go through. That's typically done by the city out of cash that the city holds, and there's a charge to that. So, if we look at 18, 42.9 million special assessments. The biggest driver being construction costs, 79%. And so And then the only real variable in here is new construction versus replacement. So new construction is 100% financed by the partials. There is no city share in new construction. And then the policy that was developed or gone back to in this latest round is on replacement projects, the homeowner pays 30% of that total cost. Well, the city share is 70%. Excuse me here. The 70% comes from sales tax or utility funds, some fees, that type of thing. But at the end of the day, we're all paying those taxes one way or another. So that 43 million at the top has to be paid for somehow. And if we want to focus our discussion on the construction, on the cost side of it, I think that's where we have to focus. So I just broke down construction, engineering, administration into some ideas, areas that there may be cost savings. So if you're looking under construction, and these are just my thoughts, I'm sure we can add to them, subtract from them, but design standards, in 2003 when we studied special assessments, we attacked design standards. And we made things skinnier, streets skinnier, and pavement lighter and narrower. And that was kind of one of our concessions as we looked towards how do we bring the cost of specials down. Personally, I'm not sure that was the right decision. I look at some of the neighborhoods from 2003 that developed with very narrow streets and thinner pavement. Seems that the streets aren't holding up as well. Yeah. I'd rather not. Just from the standpoint, those are people's neighborhoods. But if you've driven through some of those neighborhoods, cars have gotten bigger, driveways have gotten shorter, garages can't hold the size vehicles. We have a lot of off-street park or on-street parking. But it lowered the cost of specials in those developments. And those developments are still vibrant, and I think the resale in those neighborhoods continues in those price ranges. But I'm not sure that's a long-term solution. We kind of just fixated on that when we did that last time. So what I'm trying to do here is give us some ideas as we look at different ways we could go. So design standards, materials. Again, Jeff, I'd defer to the engineering side, but you can get cheaper materials. And the one under there that probably most people don't see is the construction, what I called contracting process. That's determined by state law. And in a municipal bid, you have to go out, you have to competitively bid everything. And everybody has an opportunity. And I would defer to legal, but I think what we heard was our engineers do an estimate, and if the bids come in within 140% of the estimate, low bid is accepted and the project goes forward. That's a legislative change that we might want to consider. That's a pretty big variance, but again, construction is a very cyclical business. You know, economic changes can impact it. The other thing that we started doing is amenities. And as we look at providing public goods, to me, I'm kind of a purist. The example of public goods has always been a lighthouse. That if you have a harbor and you have ships trying to come in and they're crashing on the rocks, the community, the port wants to put up a lighthouse. Who should pay for the lighthouse? Is that everybody benefits from it. The shipping traffic, the community, goods and services. We've started adding some amenities in that we're special assessing. Is that a big portion of it? Probably not, but it's something we could look at. And then new to me was the Lomar work, and that just gets us back into a real simple discussion about diversions and floodplains, something that hopefully will be solved soon. But those are all things, and then the last one, if you can control that, you're a genius, is inflation. That's, of that big driver, 80%, and we may have things we can add on to there, but if that's the area we want to focus on, those were some of the topics I thought. Under engineering, we do have the discussion about city engineering versus private engineering, and Jeff, I'd look to you on that if we can figure out a way. I don't think it's adequate just to say, oh, we should switch to private engineering. We'd need to study those costs and understand what that looks like. We have inspections that the city does. Do we do inspections, or do we push that back to the private sector? And again, design standards here, I imagine it would be possible to simply say for the city, here's our design standards, here's the size of infrastructure, here's the type of water mains, water lines, everything you have to do. Will those save us money? Administration, we do have administration. We do have to track those projects. I will tell you, when you're doing $43 million of construction, there's always going to be administrative costs, and we can't just wish them away. So, software, IT, project accounting services. And then other is just land acquisition, right-of-ways that you might have to acquire, underground testing, material quality, legal costs. And the last one, like I said, construction interest. So to me, that's one component of what we're going to have to tackle here is, do we want to get in, do we want to tackle costs? My example, I like to simplify things. On that side of it, you're in the showroom of the car dealership, and we're picking out the car. Yeah. That's the fun part. You get to pick all the options and everything else, but at some point, you get the final price for the car. So then the next thing that we look at is, how do we pay for it? And this is where I think we get, the term special assessments sort of is looked at. Special assessments are a bad thing, everything else. To me, they're a financing mechanism. And so after you've picked out your car, they move you over to the finance department, and you decide whether you want to finance the car at 24 months, 36 months, 48 months, 60 months. Do you want to lease the car? Do you want to pay cash for the car, the discounts? How do you do that? And so on the second page, again, just took and said, okay, we've got $43 million in projects. And so if we can knock that number down, the 43 million down, we can knock down special assessments, but the financing of those. But if we look at that in 2018, 43 million of bonds, that's over 10,000 partials, 10,000 lots across the city. Those bonds are sold on a 25-year basis, 25-year amortization schedule. That is one variable that we could start to look at if we want to lower payments, is move that out to 30 years. The interest rate is going to be determined by the market and the bond market when you sell bonds. When we look back in 2018, that's about 3.37%. 2.6 million a year annual debt service for the city, 216,000 a month. Under the way we do it as bonded indebtedness. Just kind of breaking that out, taking a big number, saying, okay, let's just say a partial or a lot has 35,000 of special assessments assessed against it, at 25-year amortization. The real cost, the true cost of the interest on the bond is 3.37%. Adding in our normal markup, the 1% that the city charges, works down to an annual payment on that 35,000 of about $2,300, $194 a month. That 1%, as we looked at the cost components on the first page, where we can talk about design standards, materials, whatever else, that 1% is the city's risk pool. And we get a little bit complex in this area, and this is an area that everybody kind of says, why does the city upcharge the interest rate? Well, the city does have risk, and it's economic risk. It's not easily pushed aside, but the biggest risk that the city has, the bonds that are sold for the financing are fixed interest rate bonds. And so if we think about, if we have a period of interest rates at 8% and bonds are sold at 8%, and a few years later, interest rates drop, say they drop to 4%. What happens is homeowners then can go to their lenders, run over to Gate City Bank, and borrow the money from Gate City Bank at 4%, pay off their specials. So the city now has the cash where they've paid off those specials. But the interest rate structure that they can invest that money at is at 4%. They're locked in, the city's locked in at an 8% cost of capital, and they have to pay that. So those are the type of interest rate structures that really I think give rise to whether or not that should be there. It gets very complex, and you can get lost in the city's financial statements. It's kind of old days for me to go back and look in the CAFRs and start remembering some of this stuff. But as a bond issue works all the way through, the excess, anything that's left over, is not hidden. It's not secretly put somewhere else. It goes into the general fund and is used to offset the general expenditures of the city in that manner. So if we just continue with that example and kind of run through it very quickly and say, okay, let's knock our 1% upcharge on the interest rate to 0.5%. If you look through that last table there, it boils down to about a $10 a month differential for the homeowner. I'm not discounting that's $120 a year, but that if all we do after this is come out and say, okay, we've knocked it 1% to 0.5%, I really don't think we should pat ourselves on the back and say, nice job, we really did great work here. So you go back to the front page, you go back to policy. One thing we could do is we could throw away the second page, and we could say, as a city, let's not do special assessments. Let's find another way to pay for that $43 million. Bismarck's doing that.
Got one quick question.
Yeah.
The $43 million you're talking about there, if I remember looking at the 18 plan, that's only about half of the infrastructure from the road standpoint that we would need to be repairing to maintain the 63-year life of our roads.
Mm-hmm.
So that might only be half of the numbers where
Yep.
I'm going with it.
Right.
We need to understand that total bill
Mm-hmm.
before we ever come to a conclusion of what the dollar value is.
Yep. No, I don't disagree with this, and I throw this out just as a straw man to say, let's agree on those numbers, and whether it's 43 or 63 or 83, that's one side of the equation here. And so the other side, the second page, is just simply how we're currently paying for that. And I think we can get these numbers refined as we look at it, but where are we going to focus our attention? Where do we attack this? And like I said, the Bismarck model was to say we aren't going to do special assessments. And so whatever the number is here and the cost is, how do we pay for it? Bismarck's simply substituting other revenue streams to make those payments. They're doing street utility fees and different things like that, which is fine. We can certainly attack those. But I was just trying to find a way for us to logically look at this and work it forward. So that's how I've looked at it. Like I said, you've got two major components, and you've got kind of the variable in the middle there is the city's participation. And if we're going to try and make some recommendations, where should we focus our attention? Maybe that bored everybody, confused the whole issue, but
Kevin?
Sure. I guess the way I've been looking at this is kind of really separating them. I like the concept of new versus existing. And I think that the two things I see in common is that we need transparency. That at the end of the day, no matter what, a homeowner needs to understand what they're up against, what to face, how to plan financially for it. When I look at new construction, I think in terms of, as a potential homeowner, as long as there's transparency, I have a choice. And as long as, if I want to live in a new neighborhood that has a bike path and pools and different things, as long as I know the cost, then that's my choice and I can financially plan for that. When I look at the existing, I see that more about as a budgeting process. Nobody likes surprises. We have individuals on fixed income. I kind of like the Bismarck model to that extent where we get rid of the surprises that when I move into my house and I plan my retirement, I don't have to worry about a $15,000 bill showing up and I didn't prepare to pay for that. So, I think with I think some type of a maintenance fee, a utility fee, just something to spread it out, just like we do with our homes, right? You should budget for your home repairs. You put aside money and you try, and with your insurance, it's all about trying to eliminate surprises, trying to put yourself where you don't end up in a financially impacted mode. And where on the new, I see that as that's your choice. I would lean more towards those new neighborhoods having some type of maintenance fee to pay for those amenities that they want. That's just part of the cost. But at the end of the day, you have to have transparency and not have surprises so that they know up front, my specials are $30,000, that's what I'm going to pay, that's it, I can plan for that. The 2 years later getting hit with things and surprises, that to me at the end of the day, we have to do that. As far as reducing cost, I think that's I think it's something we need to look at. I just don't know that you're going to, at the end of the day, things cost things. And we can certainly look to reduce those, but I don't know that you'll ever eliminate those.
Jeff?
Threw a lot of things out, John, that for me, you're just trying to wrap my mind around them all. But what I do know is it's a very complicated thing, and there's a lot of pieces, and I always have trouble trying to talk about it in all the pieces at once. So I like to try to separate things. But I want to kind of react to a couple of items. One is I fully understand the desire to reduce the cost up front, right? I can guarantee you that if we drive the original cost of construction down by reducing standards, you simply raise the second half of the equation. You're going to replace it quicker, and replacement is always dramatically more expensive than the original construction. So I just caution you, if the desire is to drive the first cost down of a new greenfield subdivision, you will simply increase the cost of the reconstruction, both in time, it's going to come sooner, and it's going to be considerably more expensive. So we need to just be aware of that. Now, for some people, if the goal is reconstruction is 100% not mine, drive it down. Put in a nickel where you should be spending $1, and it's going to reduce dramatically that first cost in, and you've just simply raised the ante on somebody else's money to rebuild my infrastructure, if you will, sooner. So we got to be cautious of that, in my mind. There's, I throw that out. You need to be aware of that. You just simply delay the cost. Some of the things as this task force got put together, I was trying to capture I'm going to use the word chatter, and I don't say that negative. What was the chatter that was driving it, right? And I've heard things like the best kept secrets and all that. So I'm curious if we know the scale of some of these things. What is, I'm still a little uncertain what's discretionary for decision making and what's statutory. What decisions does the city get to make and which ones don't they get to make? A few of them that I've heard the frustration is at the end of a bond issue, where's the cash go, right? And how big is that number? What's the scale of that problem? You know, is it $500,000 a year, or is it millions of dollars a year? I think it'd be helpful if we knew the scale of the problem we're trying to solve. So that's one of them. The other thing I keep hearing is and I don't think there's been many refinancings in recent years because the interest rate's been so low, right? I think most of the bond issues have been refinanced. But that being said, the decision to change or not to change the rate charged the district after a bond issue, I think for me, is that discretion, or is that a may or a shall type of a question? Can the city change their interest rate charge to the homeowner after a refinance? Though for me, those are things I think we should be chewing on, because those all drive the cost, right? What comes out of the homeowner's pocket. The other part, and they're kind of tied together in my mind, is all of those decisions can raise the cost, the annual cost. Who benefits at the end? So as the money gets transferred into the general fund, who benefits is everybody. On new construction, I don't think that's right. I think there should be an effort to attempt to stop collecting on new subdivision costs as soon as they're paid for. They're those people's dollars, right? The group of homeowners that paid for those streets and sewer and water and all that, it's their money. It's adding value to their lots, and they should capture the benefit when the bond issue is paid off for those improvements that should be done. So if a 25-year issue can be paid off in 20, I think it should be. And quit collecting, quit building excess money, and transferring it into general fund, because it's not somebody who's on the other side of town's money. They didn't put it in the fund, so they shouldn't get the benefit of taking it out. But those are things I don't think we've talked about yet. What's the scale of some of these practices? Are they discretionary or not? And what's the scale of those numbers so we know what problem are we trying to solve, right? And again, for me, it's new construction versus the reconstruction. I came on this committee on behalf of the chamber, and infrastructure, adequate infrastructure is a huge deal for business, right? And so we've got to be careful not to destroy the ability to keep our infrastructure adequate for the city to grow. And I'm not talking about should we be growing greenfields or not. This is more on the reconstruction. How does a city finance its infrastructure so that it can be competitive in the business world and fair to its residents? And there's a balance there, right? And I think we need to talk about those in two separate tranches, or it just gets muddled, right? You get this complaint has really got nothing to do with this piece. Let's try to separate them and figure out what are the differences and what's the scale. Another curiosity I've got is I fully understand managing risk. We all manage risk, right? And my curiosity is how successful has the city been on managing the risk? When's the last time a bond issue went belly up? And what was the cost of that? And what was done since then to mitigate that? I don't think we've heard that story yet. I know back in the 70s and 80s, they did, right? The economy went south, and there were some defaults. What's changed since to mitigate that risk, and should we be concerned about it yet? The add-on for interest, same thing. It's mitigating risk. How much money does that generate, and where does it go? Again, in my opinion, when it's assigned to a new subdivision, it should stay with those who paid the bill. On a reconstruction, don't know if I got my mind made up yet. It's only 30%, if you will, so it's not that big of a number relative to the cost of the infrastructure. But I think those are all separate things to break apart and then see if the pieces come back together on a recommendation. I think with that, I'm just going to leave it at that and kind of leave it at that and see where the conversation goes.
Kurt?
I guess I kind of have, at least in my mind, I've simplified it a little bit. I don't believe we're going to change the contracting process with the time frame we're talking. If we want to have something done by the first part of December, I believe we really need to focus on how we're paying the bill more than driving costs down, because we're not going to do that in that short a period. So to me, there are numerous different things that we've heard over the meetings we've had where you have multiple mechanisms to pay the bill. Fee, like was suggested earlier, like Bismarck is doing. We could change completely and go to something, do away with property taxes and specials and transfer it all to income tax, for instance. I believe we need to understand what options we have for how to pay the bill. Granted, we will have to understand what the quantity of the bill is. I don't have a good idea what that is today going forward. The city has told us they don't plan for any of the greenfield stuff. That just kind of happens. To me, that's a problem. We need to have a projection going forward of what we think we're going to continue to grow new roads at and all of the rest of the infrastructure that goes with that. We don't have that today. We're not going to get it by the 1st of December, so we're going to have to make some assumptions in that case. So I think we should focus on how to pay the bill. And for me personally, we need to go away from specials. For the reasons you were talking about, there's a lot of other behind-the-scenes stuff that costs us money that is pure overhead.
Jim?
Yeah, I tell you, I listened to all these thoughts and opinions, and this is a huge undertaking. We're talking about changing up how we tax, how we provide revenue for an entire city, and the financing of special assessments are a big part of how we finance the city currently. So I'm reluctant to suggest anything too radical, because at the end of the day, whether it's general taxes, special assessments, city fees, they're all costs out of the homeowner's pocket. So I don't want to disrupt anything too dramatically and then come back and realize we've made a $1,000 problem and $1,100 problem. So I've tried to, I probably haven't given this as deep a thought on all aspects of this as some of you have. I've been thinking about the one area I know a little bit about, and that's the greenfields development. Because that's what I see every day. This is what I do. And Jeff, I think you're right. If we try and use the cheapest materials, it's going to cost us in the long run, and we're not going to be happy. And I think we're lucky in that I work with the city staff, and a lot of cities' staffs, we got a really good one. Our engineers are pros, and I think we can rely on them to decide what we need to do as far as design standards in order to protect the city long run. I have all the faith and confidence in their ability to do that. But with that being said, I'm focusing on, as a developer and a lawyer and someone who's done this for a number of years, the process part. And we're locked into a state process where when I want improvements for a new development, I've got to start 15 months or 18 months in advance of the market to get the process in, the city staff working on it, to go through the, to go through PUPEC and to get it, engineered and to get it organized and get it in front of the city commission. Then we got to bid it, and then we got to maybe go with the low bidder, or maybe that's someone I don't like or I don't want to use because and I know they're not going to get done on time. You look around town and there's some pretty unhappy homeowners right now. I look at that process being a soft spot to save some money, because in order to get the dollars, the economies of scale we need right now under the city process, we have to go big. We put in large numbers of lots, and frankly, that's expensive for developers because we sit on them for a long time. We pay a lot of special assessments, and that's my fault sometimes because I misjudge the market. And sometimes just the way economics work out. I'd like the ability. I think we'd be better off and would probably have more greenfield developers if we got out of the business. as a city and just said, look, we're going to pay for arterial roads and we're going to pay for something to do with collectors. And when we get to these brand-new 80-acre parcels, we're done. And if you want to have pools, and if you want to have entrance monuments, and if you want to have all sorts of amenities, well, they're going to be built into the lot cost. And the city's not going to build them, the city's not going to maintain them, and that's it. And I think that that's one area where we pay 100% or the homeowners pay 100% of it. Now the city just is a financing mechanism, but that's an area we could stop and say, maybe this isn't the right answer, but it's one thing we can do to see if for the next 5 years or 7 years it helps. 'Cause I don't know a lot. Jeff, I have a lot of the same questions, and John, that you guys do. I don't know how much money the city makes on rate arbitrage. Might lose money, who knows? It's complicated. That's why accountants like Kent, stuff like this. All I can tell you is on the greenfield stuff, it's getting so expensive, and you can see the building permits in town. We're making it too expensive for homeowners to build. I saw the numbers that they presented last week, and I went through them on the Bison Meadows development a couple of years ago. I'm watching our median home price go up and our income stay low. And I know how this ends. So we got to try something from a new home standpoint. And I think, hey, maybe we decide that for a period of years we're going to get out of the way at the end of the collector roads. I don't know, or arterial roads, or I don't even know sometimes I don't know the difference between a collector and arterial, but I know what a local road is. And maybe we leave that to the developer and just see how that works for a few years. That's kind of my thoughts, Commissioner.
Ken?
Well, I look at it more from the revenue that the city generates on this. And if we were to cut the cost and it would impact the city revenue, and you're just going to have to replace it for somewhere else. Is it going to be impact fees? Is it going to be hookup fees? So you're just moving that taxation down the road. Using John's example here, where we could cut the cost on a $35,000 special by $10 a month, but realize we've got $450 million in project specials in town. So if we extrapolate all the way across, to me the math is the city makes $1.2 million going from 0.5% to a full percent. Well, if we were to drop that spread, they've just got to replace that revenue somewhere. We're just kicking the can down the road to something else. So, we could drop the cost of specials or lower the cost of specials, but then the city in turn is going to have to increase their revenue somewhere else. So it's kind of a city function as well.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. From an annual budgeting overhead, we spend $100 million a year, and finding $1 million wouldn't be that difficult to do. But it doesn't really, I think, it's just nibbling at the edges to really try and figure out how we're going to have the next 10-year or 20-year wave of quality and affordable housing from a greenfield perspective. I mean, that...
But I don't think it's just $1 million, and $1 million is a lot of money. I think there's some more dollars that are made from, the 21% fees that the city, there might be a couple more $1 million. So it's not a $1 million issue. It could be a $3 to $4 million issue. And then, but the city's got to raise that revenue somewhere to function. So that makes this process more difficult.
I agree. And then just somebody who's been around the block a few times, particularly in Bismarck, there is no way in God's green earth that the legislature is ever going to allow the city of Fargo to impose an income tax. That is just not going to happen. I guarantee you that. There's some things in life there that just won't happen from a standpoint of finding other sources of revenue. But I believe that, that what we've started here, and this is kind of been, come back to thoughts. I don't think we're done by December 31st. Because we're coming up on the eve of a legislative session. And, part of our effort here should be, what do we want to list as changes in state century code? Whether that's bidding requirements, drives down cost, whether that lobbies and works on behalf of the city and the city of West Fargo for the legislation that what I'm hearing is going to be fast-tracked. It's going to put $25 million a year into driving down specials costs on citizens. That isn't going to be, if they drive that through and pass it, send it to the governor in January, that's going to have, it ties back to this committee, this task force, to figure out what the ultimate strategy policy change that's going to happen here at the city commission. So I get your point, Kurt, about driving down costs, but I think we're going to have to think a little longer than just, how this thing was originally intended through December, because I do believe we have to have a list of recommendations and thoughts, and then get public input, out beyond maybe a 5 or 7 o'clock meeting in North Fargo, South Fargo, to really get, more citizen engagement on this, and then to have a draft template and a plan, and then see what the legislature brings. Because I think if we really want to drive down the cost, we're going to have expectations coming January 3rd, just how I see it. Whether it's funding or whether it's passing a law to allow the utility funds to use carte blanche, those are the things that we really need to think about here before January 3rd.
I'll tack on to that just here. I think there needs to be more options at the state level for how cities pay the bill. Right now, there's not, it doesn't appear that there's very many, at least to me. So I think if we can identify some additional ones that we would want to have put in the state legislation, that would be beneficial to all cities in North Dakota, not just Fargo.
Bernie?
To Curtis's point right there, though, I think you'd have to put back a lunch pail, try and get them to allow the city to do that. With what they've tried to do with property tax reductions and what they've done with county health and those types of things, I think that would be a big chore. With all due respect, it's a good idea, and I fully support that, but that would be a difficult thing. I'd like to thank John for his 2-page summary. I think that it really tends itself to one of the comments that Kevin made, and that is the transparency. This might not be as valuable in our discussion sitting around this table, but it certainly is for the public that might be watching on or observing this, or how it might be reported to the media. And I think Jeff is absolutely correct that this needs to be 2 different discussions. When our city has the pleasure of working with somebody like Mr. Bullis or whatever, and we're dealing about all new construction, there's really just about a complacency. It's just given how we're going to do it, and this is how we're going to do it. And I don't think the city should do that. I mean, we're all in a very competitive market right now. I mean, housing starts are down and all of those. We're still doing very well. We're going to be, we're going to supersede in West Fargo last year. But that complacency and not looking for alternatives is what has made us arrive at this table today, as far as the public is concerned. And so I think that that's absolutely important that, and again, I'll go to Kevin's choice of word of transparency, is the public doesn't think it's transparent. And those of you that work with the city and develop, I've heard it from numerous developers, numerous realtors, that this 1% or 1.5% interest add-on for risk, they don't have an idea what that total dollar is when you extrapolate it out for the full year and all of the projects. So I think that that's important. And I do think that in my thought process, the most important thing that we could come out of here is on the reconstruction. Because, again, to Kevin's point about what it means to the taxpayer, what it means to those homeowners, I think that's the area that needs the most work because of all the unknowns. That I hear from more of the public on that than anything. It just is. And so I think that's got to be one of our really primary focuses. And again, to the example of the prairie dog bill that you've talked about, the legislature being fast-tracked through, I don't know if you folks at the table would know this or not, but because there is a great component of that's on growth, which obviously really affects West Fargo. The projected bucket for West Fargo was $12.75 million. For reference, that's more than we collect in a year for sales tax. So, and you often hear where the city of Fargo can take and help with some of these costs by putting sales tax in. Our community only has about $10 to $12 million a year in sales tax, whereas Fargo is, I'm going to look at $50, $60 million. So they have a real pool there that can be used as a variable to help their taxpayers. So the Prairie Dog bill at 12.75, that is an absolute windfall and something that we would certainly look forward to and work with the legislature to do everything we could to secure that. But the transparency and the separation of the two with a focus on reconstruction, so there's no the surprises and those types of things go away. I think that's got to be a big part of our mission.
Christie?
I too agree with what you said, Kevin, and I would like to look at the process of how it's determined this project moves forward and how that notification happens to homeowners. I mean, all of a sudden you get a letter in the mail and this is happening in 3 months and a homeowner is just expected to prepare for that. And I'm not so sure that's always realistic. And so I'd like to look at the transparency in that process as well.
Gloria?
The perception from the consumer is that it's a moneymaker for the cities. And part of that is the flat fees for engineering and admin that are added on, and we can't go back to them because the city tells us they don't track that. So we can't go back to say, no, it's actually their actual costs, or they're losing money doing it, or they're making money. And in addition to that, the additional interest rates. So it's hard for, when I'm having conversations with people and they say, well, it's a moneymaker for the city because they charge 1% over on interest and they charge flat rates, 21% for their engineering and admin costs. I have no rebuttal. I have nothing I can say because we don't know. We don't know how much goes into the general fund in addition to the cost the city has. So I think that, in addition to that, I would like to get a better handle on some of that so we can say, no, really, the city doesn't make anything on their engineering costs, if that is true, because that is, just covering their costs. Or maybe it's not, maybe it's not even covering the costs. I don't know.
Gloria, do you see that more of on a new home, a newer home problem, or an existing home?
Yes. Yeah. New construction primarily.
If I understand it right, today, the developer has the option to use special assessments or pay cash, correct? Today,
Sort of.
well, but you do. I mean, there's nothing saying, if I understand it right, nothing saying a developer has to use the special assessment methodology.
This is true, but if we do it privately, it's been financial suicide for the developers who have tried it because we're competing against the city of Fargo and the city of West Fargo. And not all homeowners understand that if lot's $20,000 with specials, that a $45,000 lot's a better deal. And we've seen Charleswood, those guys did it the first time and it was a disaster.
Okay.
And we've seen it, so that's why, yes, that is a legal possibility.
Okay, so, but you kind of answered my question, is if it was more economical to go private, it would be happening. And it's not. So what's in the way? And there may be things, I don't know. But again, I hear these conversations mixed up. For me, the conversation of adding a percent to the interest rate, that should be a separate conversation in and of itself that shouldn't be in the same sentence as administration and engineering costs, because they're two different things, have two different outcomes, and get solved separately. And so I think at some point we got to break it apart and ask why, what's the effect of it, and is it the right thing to continue to do? I'm going to go back to the interest rate. For me, is adding costs to the homeowner, clearly, $10 a month on this example, right? My question is, at the end of the game, when the bonds are paid off, does the homeowner get the advantage of that fund? And I'm going to Greenfield, specifically to Greenfield, brand-new subdivisions. Because if they do, it's a risk management tool that the homeowner at the end doesn't pay extra for, if they do pay the bonds off early. If they don't, the homeowner pays extra for it, and it gets transferred to whoever gets that money on the backside, the general public, right? That's part of where I think we'd start to break this thing down, and we can piecemeal some decisions or some thoughts and recommendations. To the administration and engineering, that's part of my question, is if developers can do it cheaper without special assessments, I would argue they would be doing it. And I don't understand all the other obstacles, and I'd be willing to learn.
I think last week they said there was a gentleman in Bismarck that is doing it because it is more cost-effective for the homeowner in the long run. Because in today's environment, the interest rates you can get for a home loan, granted, interest rates are going up, but where they were is actually lower on a 30-year mortgage than it was for the price the city's charging. And as a homeowner, if I remember the data correctly, it was like several $100s a month cheaper to bury the cost in a greenfield build into the 30-year mortgage, as opposed to try to pay the specials off on a separate list. It's more transparent, like Kevin's suggesting, because it's all up front.
But what I didn't hear in that conversation from Bismarck is what was the projects and what was different about them. I didn't see anything, and again, I did watch the video, I watched the thing. I didn't see anything compelling in that presentation that said this is why. It was the person who made the statement's opinion that it was cheaper. I would argue, okay, what was different about that project do we know? And again, it's permissible. So if in Bismarck it's cheaper for a developer to privately finance, have at it. That person chose to do it for whatever reason. You don't know what the improvement was, what's underneath it to understand if it is better or not. I would argue that's the developer's prerogative. If they're going to put amenities into a subdivision that drive costs up, it's a financing tool. And again, if the money all stays in the subdivision, that I think is the beef on the Greenfield side, one of the beefs. On the Greenfield side is if I'm paying all this money into this fund and at the end it's not my money, that's a problem. So I'm curious, how does that get rectified in the accounting of the costs and the expenditures?
I think some of it ties together with what Gloria is saying as well as Jim. The homeowners don't understand a lot of times how the whole picture works versus the construction of it. They don't understand that.
Wait, go ahead.
No, go ahead, I'll wait.
The issue when the developer does the infrastructure and puts it in, for example, if the specials are now getting upwards of $60,000, $70,000 on new construction, they then have to add that into the price of their home when they sell it. So then a home that, if the city put in the infrastructure, would have been $350,000, now the developer, they have to list it for $450,000. The consumer doesn't necessarily see that value difference at that time. And that's what the developer struggles with when they do the infrastructure now, because of the way we have done infrastructure in this community for so long. That's what they battle.
So for me, it begs the question, do we throw a methodology of financing out the window because somebody doesn't understand it? Doesn't do anything with cost. If we're here to save costs and manage dollars,
But it's just not the person buying the home, it's the lender, for example. They'll borrow you the $350,000 on the house because the specials are off the books for mortgage purposes, per se, whereas they won't borrow you a $450,000 for the same home with no mortgages, or with no specials.
Well,
So-
what we would do is we try and equalize it, so whether you assume them or not, it's still a lien against the property. So theoretically, if you have the choice of buying a $100,000 home and $20,000 of specials, or a $120,000 home with no specials, they're equal to us. So to me, I still think it comes down to choice and transparency from the standpoint of, if I buy a new home, as long as I know that this is what I'm getting, this is what's going to cost, then that's my choice. I can finance that. What we don't want to do is have the surprises and the uncertainty of what's going to happen to me. And if I don't want to buy a new house because, man, that's expensive for specials, I don't want to do that, then that's my choice. I can go buy an existing home, but then I should know what I'm getting. And I just think it's getting rid of the surprises and making sure you know what you're getting. And then it's a personal choice if I want to spend that kind of money. That's up to me.
I kind of agree with Christie on the ability to understand what's coming, I think, is part of the problem. Because again, I'm listening to the frustration. Is the frustration that when the sewer and water and streets got put in, it was too expensive originally? Or is the frustration now there's another assessment, now there's another one, now there's another one? Is that the frustration, and is that the problem we're trying to solve, or is it the collective at the end of the day, you add them all up, and what's the problem we're trying to solve? Again, I think we're not really breaking it down enough, because I would venture the original construction to put sewer, water, streets, the basic amenities is not the problem that I tend to hear collectively. It's I've been in my house now for 3 years, and here comes another one, right? Here, and 5 years later, here comes another one, and here comes another one. I think that becomes the frustration collectively, and then it gets mixed in with all these other things.
And you're right. My experience with most homeowners, it's all about the monthly payment. They're buying a car, a house, it's what is my monthly payment going to be? And so they buy the house thinking this is my monthly payment, and then if 2 years later, another special that weren't aware of now becomes certified, all of a sudden my monthly payment that I thought was going to be $1,000 is now $1,200, and that's not in my budget. And so it's that, they're looking at what's my monthly payment going to be, and have some assurances that it's not going to change.
Well, I hate to be you have to be an expert in special assessments to own a home in Fargo, but we're again doing two different things here. In new construction, the confusion with the special assessments are the amount of special assessments levied on the day you buy the house and to what's coming. And I think the education process by the realtors has really improved, saying, look, it's a new development. You've got the wear course coming on the street. You've got sidewalks that are going to be special assessed. You have street lights. You might have an arterial corridor. These are all coming and planned for. I'm with you, Jeff. The one that's difficult to me is you're in an older neighborhood. Your expectation is, the one thing about infrastructure, it's not very glamorous. Really, the most involved most people want to get if they hit the lever on the toilet, that goes away. Where it goes to is they don't really care, and how they pay for it. But the problem is, same thing, Kevin, I'd say, you buy an older house, and you run the risk that the furnace goes out, or that the wiring is bad, and you have to replace it. It's the same thing in the infrastructure outside your house, that you buy an older house in an older neighborhood, you've got some additional potential for extra costs. But it's one thing to have a $5,000 furnace go out. It's another thing to be assessed total reconstruction of everything at $35,000 to $50,000. And so now offsetting that is, I don't think most homeowners understand that they're only paying, under the policy that's been adopted, 30% of the all-in cost of that. And 70% is being paid from other city taxing sources, be it sales tax or utility fees or whatever else. That's an education process. And I don't like the argument that maybe we're a little high on the price, but don't worry, you're only paying 30% of it. You're still paying more than you should. But there may be some programs that we look at from the legislative standpoint that says, what do we do for the individuals that we're displacing from their homes because of special assessments? And that's not to turn the whole special assessment system upside down. It's identifying the need for a certain income level to cover those and figure out a way to do that and then go forward. There are homestead credits and different things that can be applied income-based. Again, not helping here. I think we're just adding to the stack of options and ways to approach it.
Yeah, again, and you know what, I was focusing on Greenfield, the development initially, and I think, you know, to some of the risk and cost issues, you know, Jeff, I agree, I can't figure out what the interest rate risk is when the city issues a bond for new construction, but I do know if they don't issue the bonds, the risk is zero. That much even I can figure out. So I look at this thinking, hey, look, if you push this back and the city were to decide to get out of the special assessment for local roads for a period of time, and we'd find out. I don't know that it'll be cheaper. I think it'll be cheaper because I don't think our admin runs 20 points, our admin and engineering. But I could be wrong. We may have to bond at a higher rate, so that may raise costs. When they get a mortgage, they may pick a 15-year mortgage, and they're going to pay those costs off over 15 years. Might be 25, might be 30. That's up to the consumer. And then we're out of but the city's not in the game. The city doesn't have to worry about it. And I don't know that there's any reason for the city to be involved in the construction in the first place if they set design standards and they inspect it. So I look at this thinking, if we're going to try and reduce specials or reduce part of the, you know, the optics that people probably have that the city's charging this admin fee to fund other things, or that the city's charging too much, you know, maybe one option is to look at removing the city from the equation for a while. And now I understand your sentiment that there's always the option and a developer can go do that. The reason we don't is because, again, we're competing against the city. And I'll be completely clear too, my suggestion or my idea would never work unless West Fargo was on board. Because it'll just, if we were to do that, I'll tell you right now, all I would do is shift all the development to West Fargo. Because it's too easy to special assess it. And it, I mean, this is just my take on the market, on the market conditions, but you know, unless both cities were on board, it wouldn't make any sense for Fargo. And but I do think that it would give us an opportunity, at least if we were to decide for a period of years to try something different, to see if it works. It isn't, because I don't see the necessary need for this city. I don't think development would stop if the city stopped assessing local roads. I don't think we're encouraging development by doing that.
I think there's one other thing that would get taken out of the picture if you do that, is, you know, there was conversation about the guy down on the south side of town that got hit with the $600,000 in specials because he was out there first. He had 6 acres or whatever it was. If you're doing what you're saying and the city's paying for the arterials and the collectors out of a different fund, and then the developer comes in, that guy's not affected anymore. Because he's not going to get hit with $600,000 of specials. It's going to be done differently. He moved out there in the first place because he wanted to be away. He was set up functioning, fully functioning, and then he gets this monster bill. There's no benefit to him in that. That's the type of things we need to get rid of, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that would be the case. You know, I know there's going to be problems with whatever we decide because there's just too many variables, but
Correct.
It would hopefully temper some of that type of problem.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, Jim. In fact, I do agree with what you're saying. But, however, it's going to cause a problem if we just all of a sudden do that for the resale of other homes that still have specials on them. There will be an impact to existing homes, or not to the new development homes, when they go to resell,
when they compete against the ones that have special assessments still on them.
Yeah, I think you're right, that new homes would be more difficult because
Yes.
they're higher priced. But hopefully we can, if we were to make a change like that, it's not going to be without pain. I mean, it's going to take some time. It's just a question of, hey, are we going to try and figure out a way to make the overall cost less?
In my opinion, I'd just soon let Bismarck run the test of just all of a sudden stopping specials and see what the outcome is. Because I'm not convinced that or that dramatic of a change is the answer. Yeah, I don't think until we're ready to talk about the differences between greenfield and reconstruction, arterial and interior streets, we're going to get nowhere because they're all different. And I get very concerned when I just hear at a high level, we're just going to eliminate specials. Well, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem, because I'm convinced we don't even know what problem we're trying to solve yet.
And Jeff,
Inside of it.
Don't take me wrong, I'm not talking about eliminating specials altogether. I'm just saying, once we get to that local greenfield, we stop. The city's going to have to figure out how to pay for the arterials and the collectors or whatever that are going to be expensive. And it's going to be, I don't foresee special assessments going away in any way in Fargo, because we're still going to need streetlights at some point later on, and people are going to continue to get smaller specials. I'm just looking at this going, none of us really know if less specials would be a great thing or not. I think it'd be I think it'd at least be a step towards some other way of trying to lower the costs. But we're always going to, the non-greenfield thing is a way more complicated discussion that is going to impact the city in many other ways, and I don't have a lot of answers in that regard.
Tony, I think we've got, when we talk about transparency, I'm an educator, that's where I come back to. Transparency is education. And just the conversation we're having around this table is not a conversation that the homeowners can rationally have without a lot of emotion. And, of course the city's gouging in their interest rate. Why wouldn't they? And the interesting part about that, I've always been a free market guy. If the city profits on something, everybody says that's bad. Well, if the profit then is applied against things that you would normally be taxed for, I'm not so sure that's bad. But I think, we do have to be very careful and talk about new construction. And I've always taken the position under new construction that as long as the private sector development has absolutely free will to do it on their own and finance it on their own and build it in the price of their lots, they can do that. We do have examples. I'm not sure that we have to stop special assessments, but wasn't the
Cardinal Minch,
Edgewood, that was all individually financed by the developer. It seems to be thriving. I don't study those things, but I kind of feel there's a check and balance on new construction that I truly believe that if private developers saw a way to have a price advantage in not putting cheap infrastructure in, but putting in the infrastructure and financing it through the banks, that would happen. And I think that's worthy of all sorts of discussion. That's a whole different discussion than somebody living in a 30-year-old home gets a notice that here's your new special assessment. They don't have the option of saying, well, wait, I'm going to get my cousin to go dig up the street in front of my house. I'll put my own sewer and water and paving into your specs, and I can maybe control that. That's different. But I believe that's why the homeowner is participating at 30% instead of 100% of that cost. So I don't know if we've gone anywhere.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
I'm not sure we've gotten anywhere. I think we have a good discussion basis.
I think there's some history from the rest of the states that I've still not seen good data that says what cities are using specials like Fargo does, or even the state of North Dakota, outside of the state of North Dakota. We had the gentleman stand up a few meetings back from Kansas and said, what in the blazes are specials? I've heard that from numerous people that come out of Iowa, Illinois. We don't have specials. What the heck are these things? So there's many places around the country that are not using specials like North Dakota.
Well, Bismarck will be one now. And again, I think instead of special assessments, we just have to talk about infrastructure financing.
Right.
We've created this monster that everybody, adds to how terrible it is and call it specials, but it is simply a financing mechanism. If it's the right one or the wrong one, we can discuss. But, if we don't have special assessments, we're going to have user fees or utility upcharges or some way to deal with it. And I don't say that it's right or wrong to have specials. It's just, to me, it's just the way you're paying for them.
Right, and I think that's what we need to get down to as a group, understand what the options are for paying for special, not for special, but paying for the infrastructure.
Yep.
And then maybe just split it out into the two options, or there might actually be three, because you could potentially do repavement of locals differently than you do arterials and collectors. You could split that up if you chose to. But at some point, we got to sit down and decide, what are the options? If we had a green page, a blank page, and we're starting from scratch, what's the right thing to do? You said we can't go back to the state and talk about sales tax, but income tax. To me, that's very short-sighted on our legislature if that's truly the case. Because if you look at the total taxation for the people in North Dakota, I would contend that if we simplified it and put it all in one location, and it was a smaller number than what they're paying out today, the citizens of the North State would be happy with that, even if it did mean that the income tax went up. Their total tax bill may go down. And so if we don't look at the whole picture, you can't convince the public, the general guys paying the bill, what the right answer is. I mean, that's, to me, really the crux of what we're looking at is, how do we pay the bill? And it's the taxpayer that's paying the bill. The magnitude of what they're going to pay will be changed by the Prairie Dog Fund, potentially. But that could change just with a percentage at some level. Instead of a 0.5%, it becomes a full percent or whatever, the other way around. That's just a magnitude at that point. What's the most fair option that takes out the deals with the person that's been in their home for 35 years, 40 years, and now they get hit with the big infrastructure bill? Those are the types of things I believe we need to figure out how to fix, so that does not happen.
So I think one of the challenges, and we're not going to solve the problem, I don't think, is this committee anyway, this task force, is what does a community need for infrastructure? What I've learned in my many years of work is there is no fair tax. Not a single one is fair. There's a bunch of stuff out there, right? Collect it any way you can. But we can talk all day about the source of money. What we can't control is, what does the city need for infrastructure? Because that's what you're financing infrastructure with. So I can assure you, I understand and feel for the person who's been in their home for 30 years, and all of a sudden there's an assessment. Okay, so you got to ask the question, are we going to rebuild that street or not? So go down both tracks. Don't rebuild it. And come back and tell me 10 years after that street's destroyed what the value of the house is. I'll assure you, it's a heck of a lot less than it was before this, when the street was good. So there is value that gets added. I think the challenge is, what's the value and how do you cover it? What do you need for infrastructure? Because if you let your infrastructure go to a disrepair, you've lowered the value of everybody's property, and you're down a degradation track, you're not down a growth track. So you have to kind of understand that. In my mind, that becomes part of the conversation. Is there benefit to the lots adjacent to a street that's being reconstructed? And the city's chosen 70-30. I don't know if that's right. I think what I'm hearing is the uncertainty of the bill coming is part of the problem. How does that homeowner know? You know, you got to be out 15 months. The homeowner, I think, sometimes finds out a month before. Where's that conversation so they understand, here's my choices? Should they have a choice? Should you let the neighborhoods choose if you're going to rebuild their streets or not? It's an option. Maybe you want, once one area is going to say, let them go. I don't want the streets redone. I'll drive through potholes for the rest of, okay? But does that make sense? I don't know. But what I do know is infrastructure is critical for a strong, healthy city, and this is part of the conversation. How do you build infrastructure? How do you develop it? The other disadvantage our community has on the finance side is we are going down a track to spend a couple $2 billion on a flood control project. Better keep that front and center in our minds, because that's going to be paid for out of the same dollars we're talking about for alternative means of financing. And that's going to suck a lot of money out of people's pockets, whether they're residents or visitors, and that is a significant difference in how Bismarck can look at, we're just going to throw sales tax on the table, where this community's dedicated sales tax, so we have flood protection, which we also need. So again, I know there is no perfect tax, but with a conversation that has to be held when you start talking about not spending money is, what's the outcome of not spending money? And if you're going to strangle your infrastructure system, we're on the beginning of decline, because that is not the answer. The question should be, how do you more efficiently build your infrastructure? Those are all legitimate things, and that is a factor that should be dealt with. But it isn't, you have to understand the outcome. Again, I don't have a problem assessing an older neighborhood, because there is a benefit. The alternative is degradation and a lowering of value. So you got to balance that, or that house will not sell when it comes time to wanting to sell the house.
Yeah, and I would agree with you, Jeff, that you need to have this street. You wouldn't want to go the route of letting neighborhoods choose whether they do it or not. I kind of look like as insurance. As a homeowner, I buy insurance to spread out my risk. And all of us collectively are paying into a pool of money, and we all hope that it's not our house, but if it does happen, all of us pay. If my house burns down, if you've all paid into the insurance fund, you're going to help me pay for my house. And that's a risk-reward relationship that we take. So I look at the existing, if we could develop it so that we create a pool of funds that is used to repair and rehab existing infrastructure, we all win, because we're all at some point in time going to probably have our street repaired. It's just, how do you stop and start from the existing homeowners that have already paid? That's the hard part that I don't know that's the hard part. How do you start it?
And part of my concern with this is that, okay, so all of the city and people, including the people who have $50,000 in brand new specials on their house, are going to pay more to pay for someone's rebuild when they just paid 50 grand for their streets. So, we can talk about shifting the cost anywhere we want. I mean, there's 100 ways to pay for it. And I just don't have that bandwidth mentally. I can figure out that what can we really do here? Can the city live with less, like Don had said, can they live with one, like half point, to try and cover the interest rate risk, whatever that is? Can we lower admin and some other cost, or does that just eat into what the city can pay? The city's already paying 70%. I mean, if we lower other sources of city revenue, can the city say, great, we can do engineering for 5, but we got to go back to 50/50? I don't know if that changes the total dollars. And that's all we're doing then, is just shifting around dollars and who's paying for it and where. So, infrastructure, especially with the rebuild, is probably a foregone conclusion. And I understand it's a cost and it's a tough one coming, and I think, Jeff, you're right. Maybe the city can work on a 3-year plan and give people some time. But people have all sorts of expenses that come with owning a house. Sometimes they need new roofs. Sometimes they need furnaces. The street's a big one, but there's all sorts of costs, that go into it. If we can avoid those situations where we hit somebody with $60,000 because they're a corner lot, maybe we pick a cap for the street and the city pays for the rest. I don't know. But I don't think there's not going to be a magic bullet here where we get free infrastructure. And as Jeff correctly pointed out, there's a $2 million hickey lurking out there that's, we're going to try and have to figure out. B with $1 billion. And I still have no idea how
You
that's.
say hickey?
I did.
Well, that's a
whatever.
big hickey.
This is going to be a problem child. What we're talking about here in the $45 million range, I don't even know how we're going to sail that one by the homeowners.
We're all going to learn a new term called overlapping debt. The finance guys back there are going to say what, but they know what it is. The user fees, I'm almost embarrassed to admit that I thought about user fees and how they could work, and I love the private sector. So in the private sector, if the private sector ran our infrastructure, they would charge user fee. Their rates would cover the repair and maintenance of their system, and they would make decisions on new infrastructure or new product based on what they can charge for it. And it seems pretty simplistic that you just switch over to user fees, but it becomes problematic very quickly for people that have special assessments. And to switch to user fees, what you have to understand is the homeowners own the infrastructure along the fronting property. And so to switch to user fees, the city would have to buy the infrastructure back from the homeowners and then start charging the higher user fees to make it fair. And so what you'd have to do is create a system of saying, this home has fully depreciated $25,000 of infrastructure. And so with $25,000 credit, you can now pay your water bill and your street maintenance fee and all those things until it's used up. But you can do it.
Is that a road we want to go down?
Yeah, I don't think it is. And the nice part about special assessment, the one thing that, they've been demonized, but the thing I like about special assessments, by law, they're tied explicitly to benefited improvements that benefit that property. And so as you step away from special assessments, you get the disconnect between the revenue source and the expense source. And that's where you get a whole bunch of confusion that I don't think anybody realizes when they're paying sales tax on their purchase at the grocery store, that it's helping to rebuild a sewer in a 30-year-old neighborhood. With specials, the nice part about them, that you know exactly what they are and what they've gone for. And maybe the city does need to find a way to be more explicit and explain exactly what goes into it. And everybody has a little bit of sticker shock, and you want to blame somebody. And so why not? Yeah, well, it's the city's making all this money.
Yeah, it's just great point. I mean, it's got to blame somebody, and in a world today when everybody hates government, mistrusts government, it starts at the federal level, makes its way down to the local level. People start pointing fingers, and I keep coming back to what's if the average person who really had a concern really spent the time to understand the data, would they would appreciate knowing, obviously, spending what the value is, and it really isn't going to change the meter from a standpoint of, I come back to the 70/30, hindsight's 20/20. In my opinion, based on the people that I've talked to, if the city had never changed that policy to 50/50, we wouldn't have had the concern and the reestablishment of existing neighborhoods to the degree that it was. Most people say, I'm benefiting, what's reasonable for me to pay for that share of that cost? Most people, again, people that I've talked to. The real crux of the matter is that the folks that I know running for the legislature, they're out door-to-dooring in the south part of town where the new greenfields is really the impact. I mean, it gets back to the income. Their incomes aren't growing, the costs are growing, and that's really in my opinion, a larger challenge is to figure out how to bring that cost down so affordable housing continues in growth. Because the Prairie Dog Fund and the 70/30, I believe, largely is going to cover, the ecosystem we've created because sales tax was approved in the 90s for existing neighborhoods. What level and how much per year should we be doing? But it's important in years past with 700 water main breaks a year, now down to less than 60, I think the number is. We've come a long ways that was the driver behind that. And so it's amazing how fast an hour and a half went, but I've tried to just stand back and listen. And so what I'm going to suggest and propose is that I'll spend time with city staff who've been, listening to this discussion today in my notes. And what I'd like to do is come back with a 1 or 2 page draft plan that covers greenfields, existing neighborhoods, legislative changes, cost of construction, and take a crack at something that's on paper. It captures all your thoughts today. Just pick it apart, add to it. We don't like that, take it out, but we got to figure out how to bring, to some point of a discussion document, and if that makes sense, we'll do that. I'm looking at Kent and Dan in particular, and then capture some of the thoughts that have been talked about in past meetings and just say, okay, here's a rough outline. Here's the roadmap. It might take till May to get there because of the legislature adjourning, but here's kind of, what you've said, and here's what we've tried to articulate on paper, and then you take it from there. Make sense? Kent, I'm going to give you 75 seconds to respond to anything you've heard.
Well, the only thing that bounced around in my mind, and I certainly appreciate all of the input and the discussion is valuable, but, we have to run a city, and the financial affairs of the city are pretty intricate, and they're all interconnected. There's a yin and a yang. You push here, and it comes out here, and there's a need here, and there's a need there, and we have crime here and crime there, and there's a lot of moving parts and pieces to manage a city. And in the end, we do our best through formulating budgets, formulating spending plans, and trying to balance the scorecard. So I just urge, to be mindful of that. We'll try our best to bring the educational piece to the forefront. I mean, it's even amazing within our own existing staff and our city leaders, there's still some educational opportunity, and there's still some financial concepts that we can focus on to make this better, perhaps. I think there's some opportunity on lowering the cost of financing by working with the state. I think that would bring the monthly payments down considerably. And I know that there's already legislation in play or starting to be developed that will help that. So if you're feeling like your war chest is a little empty right now, or you're struggling with like, what good is going to come as a result of all this? This is a statewide issue. And the legislature has poked a stick at it for several sessions, and they've always concluded this is a local issue. They haven't really made decisions that have altered the state law for a long, long time. So what you're working with is a set of parameters that's tightly scripted It's tightly prescribed. We follow those parameters, and we'd be happy to roll out some of those things where there may be opportunity for enhancements to some of that state law. And the other thing that I hear when I talk to the League of Cities and my counterparts when we have the league conference is, okay, Fargo, that's fine for you, but what's good for Fargo or what's good for West Fargo isn't necessarily even relative to most of the other cities in the state. So therein lies a challenge as well. I'm going over 75 seconds, I know, but I want to get my point
It'll be
across.
in the minutes.
Okay. Some of this may have to go by the way of home rule charter and your authority to make the decisions for your community. And I know we've maybe been a little timid about that over the years. And in some cases, we've got our hands slapped because maybe we went a little too far. But that still doesn't preclude you from evaluating and using your home rule authority to do what's right for your community. It could be vastly different than state law. I mean, I think you have a certain amount of powers that could be exercised, and maybe I'm speaking too boldly, but we have chosen to follow state law. And so all I want you to know is that what's good for Fargo would be good for Fargo, may not be good for Grafton, may not be good for Western North Dakota. Everybody does it a little differently, but in the end, the state has used special assessments since it was a territory. Started in the late 1800s. So we would really be moving the ship by completely moving in a different direction. And again, that's not my opinion about not to go there. You can go wherever you want. But back to the yin-yang effect, we have a city to run. We have needs beyond infrastructure for our public safety needs, our transportation needs, our healthcare needs. I mean, it goes on and on and on. So do we make money on this process? Maybe we do. But that's offset by an expenditure over here that isn't funded anywhere. There's a lot of functions within the city that generate zero revenue. Police, fire, very little revenue. 50% of our budget, 45 to 50 million. Where does that money come from? Well, it's a collection of fees, it's a collection of taxes, it's the all-in part of the budget process. So I'll stop there, but those would be some things, and we're here to help. We're certainly, staff is capable of drawing some of that stuff out.
Thank you, Ken.
Yeah.
How many will be at the meeting on the 13th? So I see 4 hands and 4 heads nodding no. I ask that because I think it's very important that we find a date that everyone can be at. So if the desire is to look at other options, we can do that. I know Mr. Dabbert's out of town. I believe Commissioner Gehrig is coming back in the next week or so from his training.
I'm out of state that week.
Okay.
I'll try to call in that morning. Assume it's going to be a 7:30 to 9.
That's kind of been the...
time?
I'm sorry?
Do you have enough time to pull this together, what you're talking about doing by the 13th?
Would an extra week help city staff if we pushed it back to that Tuesday before Thanksgiving?
See heads nodding yes. And that would be the week before Thanksgiving. So, based on the body language here, I think it might behoove us to move it back a week, do another poll of it those days, the 3rd week in November. Give time to put, an outline or a roadmap together that, that's the agenda item. Next time is pick it apart. If you have other ideas from today till, that next meeting, send it. We'll put it on the list. I'll make a call to the tax department, get some kind of a barometer on 0.5% income tax under home rule charter, see what that'll generate, throw it on the list. To Kurt's point, as an example of another payment method, but that'll take a little time as well. But
Yeah, that week of the 19th would work better for me. I mean,
okay.
That Monday, Tuesday work real good for me.
Okay. Well, Shelley will, and Diana will get an email out to look at options. Bernie?
Mr. Chairman, with the point that Mr. Dabbert made, in trying to maintain some consistency in our communities, if staff would respectfully include Tina in some of those discussions. Can't guarantee anything, we're two different cities, but we would certainly work towards that goal. Thank you.
Any other requests? Hearing none, we're adjourned.
Thank you.